Alright, welcome back to the airbrushing tutorial, Airbrushing 101. Made the first video in that we talked about the equipment that you're going to need. That's your airbrush, a compressor to run the airbrush, a hose between the airbrush and the compressor. We talked a little bit about paint, talked about solvent-based house color paints, which I use exclusively. We talked a little bit about reducing them. That's simply thinning your paint out with a reducer. Depending on your ambient temperature is going to dictate what reducer that you do buy. And then we talked a little bit about stencil work. And I have this Biomex stencil here that I bought from Chicago Airbrush that we're actually going to put up on here on this piece of powder coated side panel, powder coated black, and we're going to talk a little bit about primer, because I think I left that out of the last video. Primer is essential for any kind of paint work that you're going to do, whether it's bare metal. If you stripped your case down to bare metal, if you stripped the chassis side panels, if you strip that down to bare metal, what I use, now you don't necessarily have to be using the same system I do, but I am a fan of House of Color, so that's predominantly what I'm going to talk about. House of Color's direct to substrate epoxy primer. This is some of the best stuff I've ever used. Very silky, smooth finish to it. It can be mixed in a 1K or 2K fashion. If you're going to mix it in 2K, of course, you're going to need a hardener with it. This is the KD 3000 series DTS hardener. Now, I do encourage you to start doing a little bit of research on your own about primers, about base coats, clear coats. There's a lot to understand and a lot more that I don't even know about. What I will do is talk to you about the system that I use, and that is House of Color. So the very first thing you're going to want to think about is, what material am I going to paint? Is it bare metal? Does it have a powder coat finish or a painted finish that I'm not going to remove? Or is it a type of plastic? That's going to dictate what kind of primer you're going to use. Epoxy primer, like the KD 3001, which is the indication for black, is that one. This is a direct to bare metal primer or a scuffed painted surface. I prefer stripping cases down to bare metal. It just seems to work out a little bit better for me. I don't necessarily like to shoot primer over a painted surface, but once again, you know, take away from this what you want. Who am I to tell you what to do? Strip it, don't strip it, but keep in mind, a primer is essential for your base coat color to have something to hold on to and give you a little bit of protection if you do strip down to bare metal. This epoxy primer is going to, you know, be the very first building block in your paint. Adhere to, I talked about it a little bit last time. Adhere to is a ready to spray adhesion promoter. It's clear. Developed, I think, for plastics. Of course, there's a data sheet on this as well as any of the House of Color products. You can pull up the data sheet and read about that product. I'm a fan of using Adhere to when it comes to plastics. For instance, fans. You know, there's a lot of plastic parts, plastic bezels on computers, some of the cheaper models that may not be all aluminum or all steel. Adhere to works really well on on plastics. And it also, another place where I do use Adhere to is on surfaces like this, where I'm not going to remove a powder coat from the factory or a paint finish. I think if you do start experimenting with airbrushing, you might want to check out Adhere to, because I've used it with some very, very good results. We will spray Adhere to on this panel. This panel has been wiped with wax and grease remover to remove any kind of fingerprint grease, any kind of dirt, contaminant that might have got on it while I was kind of laying down over in my photo booth area. Next thing we're going to do here, we're going to talk about the stencil. Now I'm going to take a short break. I'm going to tape this stencil up, and we're going to mix up some base color, some graphic solid white. Okay, so we got the stencil taped on. One thing to keep in mind if you're going to do stencil work, just bear in mind your overspray. If you're going to do some stenciling on like an existing paint job, and you're just going to add a little something over the top of it after the fact, make sure you either paper off, tape it off, because your overspray will travel, and you might be surprised at how far it will travel. This, I don't really care. I built a bit of a border with it, just for an example. If you are going to do some stencil work, once again, bear in mind your overspray. You don't want to ruin what you've already accomplished. So, you got yourself an airbrush and a compressor, you got some paint, now what, right? In this example, I'm just going to start building on this. I mean, you can use any colors you want to. This is just for demonstration purposes on how this works. We're going to lay down some white, just some basic BC26 solid base white. That's going to give us the foundation for this. Since this is already black, you got to start thinking about what kind of colors are going to pop out. I'm going to start layering this, but my very first color is going to be white. So let's get started. I've already got a little bit of white mixed up here that's ready to spray. But for an example, this is not reduced. I talked about how I buy my paints, and I like to reduce them myself. So airbrush application, 1-to-1. That means 1 part white, 1 part reducer. So I'm going to go 1 ounce and 1 ounce. I'm going to use my mixing cup. I'm going to get myself 1 ounce of white. Thereabouts. There's 1 ounce. To 1 ounce of reducer, 1-to-1. Stir that up. Now, if you have problems at 1-to-1, seems too thick, brush doesn't want to spray, reduce a little bit more. You do run the risk of breaking this paint, but I've had good luck with this stuff being a little bit heavy, a little more heavier reduced than 1-to-1. But you shouldn't need to. Just saying. Once you start experimenting, you'll figure it out on your own. Well, I forgot to use my strainer, of course. So I've got 1,000 of these little cups. I'll strain this paint. Make sure we get all the crap out of it that we don't want in there or want in our brush, clogging up our tip. Add it to my already reduced 1-to-1 paint. So we're going to be ready to spray. Now once you get set up with your compressor, you're going to want to check your inlet pressure to this gun. I believe it's 25 psi it operates. You can vary the inlet pressure of these guns. There is a safety factor though. They don't like you going over a certain pressure. You risk doing damage to your gun if your inlet pressure is too high. That's why most compressors have a regulator on them that you can check what kind of pressure you've got. I'm spraying at about 25, I think. Somewhere in that neighborhood. I do spray with the needle stop off. I don't like having a regulated needle. I also spray with this nozzle cap off. That gives me a little more fine line control, I think. Once you get your brush, you're going to start experimenting right away. You can paint on paper or whatever you want to. Try and get the feel of this thing. And a little bit of paint goes a long way when you're airbrushing. Okay, what I'm going to start doing is lightly filling this in. Then we can go back over it once we do have the basic pattern down to highlight any areas that we want. I hope this turns out okay. Sometimes your air is going to lift your stencil off. You can hold it down with your finger. If your stencil comes up off the work surface, you're going to get overspray underneath it. We might have already done that. I'm not too concerned. This is I'm just messing around here. What I am going to do though, right now, is turn my exhaust on. It's going to get a little foggy.